Kashmir is a hidden jewel, a Shangri-La, whose breathtaking beauty, rich culture, and peaceful inhabitants once attracted admirers from all over the world. Situated north of India, Kashmir is surrounded by 4 countries: Pakistan, India, China, and Afghanistan, with a narrow Wakhan strip separating it from the Soviet Union. The people of Kashmir take great pride in their diverse cultural heritage, sharing a common loyalty to their homeland. However, this once peaceful state has been transformed into a scene of turmoil and bloodshed. During the last 4 decades, the 12 million citizens of Kashmir had been struggling for freedom. In 1947, when Britain ended its rule and India and Pakistan were declared independent nations, Kashmir did not join either of these 2 countries. In the ensuing events, 1/3 of Kashmir fell under the control of Pakistan, and 2/3 under the control of India. Both countries declared their intentions to govern temporarily over Kashmir. In the resolution of January 24, 1957, the UN Security Council reminded the governments concerned of the principles embodied in its earlier resolutions, that the final disposition of the state of Kashmir will be determined in accordance with the will of the people, expressed through the democratic method of a free and impartial plebiscite, conducted under the auspices of the United Nations. The principle was originally accepted unconditionally by India. Lord Louis Mountbatten, the Viceroy, addressing the Chamber of Princes in July 25, 1947, said that the state will have complete freedom. Technically and legally, they become independent. On January 15, 1948, Srimati Pandit, the Indian representative to the United Nations, said of Kashmir, whether she should withdraw from her accession to India, or either accede to Pakistan, or remain independent with the right to claim admission as a member of the United Nations. All this we have recognized to be a matter of unfettered decision by the people of Kashmir. On July 9, 1951, former Prime Minister Nehru of India stated, "Kashmir has been wrongly looked upon as a prize for India or Pakistan. People seem to forget that Kashmir is not a commodity for sale or to be bartered. It has an individual existence, and the people must be the final arbiters of their future." Since the Indian government still has refused to grant the citizens a right to self-determination, resentment and tension among Kashmiri citizens continue to grow. Encouraged by the wave of freedom in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, in early 1990, the largest demonstration ever witnessed in the name of freedom was held in Kashmir by over 1 million freedom-loving citizens. Peaceful efforts at dissension were quickly crushed by the Indian government. The response to this and other demonstrations unleashed a reign of terror, as defined by the London Times. Hundreds of thousands of military forces were sent to Kashmir to squelch the uprising. The Indian government alleges that the uprising is caused by so-called militant separatists, whose actions are instigated by external forces. However, the dissension arises from all segments of the population, including lawyers and other professional groups who have united in the cause. The government has tried to suppress the voice of the people through scare tactics and repression of the most basic human rights and freedoms. Curfews have been imposed, homes ransacked in search of militants. The elected government was replaced by a governor appointed by the Indian government, and foreign journalists expelled from Kashmir. Human rights organizations, including Amnesty International and the Red Cross, have been prevented from entering Kashmir.
Amnesty doesn't take a position on the territorial dispute between the Indian government and the state of Jammu and Kashmir. I also want to note that the abuses that we have documented, the government abuses that we have documented, take place in the context of violence also by the armed separatist groups, which have kidnapped and killed government officials and civilians. Amnesty's concerns in Kashmir, in summary, include widespread committing by the Indian government of extrajudicial killings, that is, in which people are arbitrarily killed, civilians or suspected members or sympathizers of separatist groups, also widespread rape of women in Kashmir by Indian troops, Indian government troops. And this goes on a very large-scale basis. We also have serious reports and persistent reports of torture and of those that are held in the custody of police and government troops. These are the way, even though Amnesty has not been able to visit India to undertake a mission there since 1978, we do continue to get information from a number of sources of people that have left that area, of information that is leaked out or simply sent out by people who remain in that area through the press, the Indian press and other press, through refugees. And so we get our information. We are able to continue to get some information through a number of these sources. And our documentation, we then corroborate with at least 2 or 3 other sources to try to determine its accuracy before we go public with it. However, we continue to have outstanding requests to undertake another mission in India, including the area of Kashmir. In our most recent request, which we made in April of '91 to the Indian government, we requested undertaking a mission to various parts of India, including Kashmir. Their response was, after there's a change in government, we will get back to you. Well, there has long since been a change in government, and we have still not heard from them.
The crackdown by the Indian government has crippled the economy of Kashmir, which is based on tourism. Far worse is the suffering of innocent victims at the hands of the Indian military forces. Despite India's efforts to conceal the truth, reports of brutality and torture of peace-loving citizens have managed to filter through to the free world.
My major concern during this time was for the youth of Kashmir. They cannot go to schools, so they will be uneducated, unskilled, and illiterate. The other half of youth is either in Indian detention camps and jails, or they are injured and are lying in hospitals. In addition to all this, there were constant firings. Many houses were put on fire, and there were tremendous crackdowns in large areas where the residents were taken out of their homes and they had to go on the streets, and their houses were searched for hours and days.
Nobody knows what is happening inside Kashmir. Only Kashmiri people know. There is no militants or anything, like they say, or Muslim fundamentalists. No, it's all Kashmiris. It's all Kashmiris. They are fighting for their lives. Our sisters and our daughters have been raped. That I can't even say whatever is happening in Kashmir. I get too emotional.
Then my brother picked up the phone. He said, "You will not believe what happened today." He said, our brother Ashraf was picked up. He went to pay the phone bill. He came out of the telegraph office after paying the phone bill. He was picked up, kidnapped by the army soldiers. He was blindfolded and tied up the arms and legs, and doesn't know which torture center he was taken to, and he has been very badly bruised, and he is beaten very much on the head, and they have created a basket case out of him, and we are all in shock. And the luckiest thing is that he is an unusual case, that after 5 hours of torture, they let him go. That's why they're lucky that he's alive, which is unusual, because they have seen on a daily basis 5 to 6 young boys, ages between 14, 12, up to 20, being defaced after me, killed in the torture centers, thrown out of the army trucks into the streets of Srinagar, for which my brother has eyewitnessed 2 cases himself at Dal Dal Lakes, there's a famous square, Dal Gate, where he saw himself last week 2 young bodies defaced, which couldn't even be identified who these boys were. The only way they can identify those kids, those missing, defaced, killed, are the families have to remember what clothes they were wearing.
There were a few trucks and cars coming, and they stopped them all, like 7 of them. They had the truck driver come down and show his ID. So while he was showing his ID, they shot him dead. And then they stopped 3 or 4 cars that were following the truck and had all of them come down and shot them one by one. There was one woman with a child and the taxi driver. They killed them all. And following that one was one of our relatives. There are 3 brothers, like elderly brothers, 3 of them. One was 75, one was 80, and one was in his early 70s. They were in the same taxi. And they shot all 3 of them. One of them survived. 2 brothers died right there, and one survived. He gave us the story afterwards, after he regained his conscience. And then they turned towards the shops, because the shops were open, some of them, and killed the shopkeepers right inside their shops. And the day I got there, the bodies had been taken away from there, but the blood was still on the street.
My family is there. This is the opportunity I get to see them. I don't know after a month, or if I go after 3 months, will they be there? Will all my friends be there? Because every time you go, you hear, somebody is already dead.
The scare tactics used by the Indian military forces to suppress an uprising has only made the cry for freedom ring louder.
We want an independent Kashmir. Here everyone is ready to die. I'm ready to die. Everybody, even young persons are ready to, old, young, everybody is ready to die. We can't back up this time. It's now or never. It's time to act now or never.
We want freedom. All Kashmiris, they want freedom. They want freedom from India. That's all.
People, including hundreds of doctors and health professionals, continue to peacefully demonstrate in defiance of the atrocities they've seen committed at the hands of the military forces. Though the people of Kashmir are willing to sacrifice their lives for the principle of freedom, the occupying forces are too strong for the victims of oppression to liberate themselves without the support of the world community.
I don't see how anyone can look at the pictures and read the reports filtering out of Kashmir and not shed a tear. It is truly horrible. Many Kashmiri Americans have asked me why the world doesn't do more for the people of Kashmir. I have been told that the world doesn't care. Well, I assure you that the people do care about the abuses taking place in Kashmir, but they only care when they know about the abuses. Tragically, most people do not know about them. When I first started talking about Kashmir on the House floor, many of my colleagues did not believe that human rights violations were taking place in Kashmir. In fact, many of them were receiving false reports from the Indian government. Fortunately, after several years of reading the reports and showing the pictures, the message is starting to get through. Earlier this year, I attempted to cut 50% of U.S. development aid to India until it granted human rights groups unrestricted access to Kashmir. Although this amendment was defeated by a vote of 188 to 229, we won the support of almost half of the U.S. Congress. I wish we could solve all of the problems of Kashmir today, because right now, as I speak, there are people being tortured, killed, and imprisoned without just cause in Kashmir. But solving Kashmir's problems will require time and patience. We can't get discouraged, because we are making progress. I pledge to continue the fight in the U.S. Congress. In fact, I have introduced 2 bills designed to help the people of Kashmir. The first, H.R. 953, will cut off U.S. development aid to India until human rights groups are granted unrestricted access to Kashmir. To date, 48 members of Congress have co-sponsored my bill. I've also introduced House Resolution 87. This resolution calls on the President, the United Nations, and the international community to establish the conditions necessary for a plebiscite in Kashmir.
If people around the world knew of the kind of violations that were taking place against people in Kashmir, they'd be outraged. It's a question of bringing the information to them. The most important contribution would be to assure that human rights organizations and the international press has full access to Kashmir. The rest would naturally follow because of people's basic concern.
There have been a number of very serious reports of human rights abuses in Kashmir, ongoing abuses by the Indian Army, and we take those matters very, very seriously. We've had several briefings in the caucus on them. We have interfaced with the Indian ambassador on a number of occasions and have written the Indian government in Delhi about them. We take them as very serious human rights abuses. We think that the best way that we can help where human rights are being abused is not only by telling the offending government that we know that the rights are being abused and we're watching what they do, but to try to educate our own members of Congress and the public generally as to what is happening. And governments across the world take great umbrage at the fact that we would point out that things are happening. The Indian government has objected very strenuously when we pointed out human rights abuses, whether it's in the Punjab or in Kashmir or elsewhere. But we think that this is a way to take off some of the edges, the rough edges that occur in dealing between the government and individual citizens in those parts of the world. And we will continue to press and work with international human rights organizations across the world to make certain that people are aware of what is going on and bring pressure on the governments to stop the abuses.
The ordeal of Kashmir has entered a new phase. A year ago, as I've said, we saw demonstrations larger than anything which occurred in Eastern Europe in favor of self-determination, and no one in the outside world can remain under the illusion that the people of Kashmir are now reconciled to Indian rule. Since then, we've had these acts of unspeakable barbarity committed by the Indian forces of occupation, which have served to harden the resolve of the people to be free. But unlike the victims of repression in Eastern Europe, Kashmiris have no chance of liberating themselves by their own unaided efforts. The free world has got to act now in support of the people against their oppressors, and it's the task of Kashmiri exiles, working with parliamentarians and others who believe in the right of self-determination, to enlist that help.
By awakening the consciousness of freedom-loving people around the world, an even stronger voice can speak out, bringing an immediate halt to the gross violations of human rights, urging Indian authorities to allow international human rights organizations and journalists to once again visit Kashmir. With the active support of the world community, the principles embodied in the UN resolutions can be enacted, giving Kashmir the opportunity to be free. There's no turning back for the people of Kashmir. Only with the support of the outside world will Kashmir be converted from a killing field back to a peace-loving paradise, where unimpeded can shine the precious jewel of freedom.
Kashmir is basically my life. Everybody that lives there is they're just part of my heart, you know? And to see them go through pain, it really kills me, you know?
Reducing tension. The foreign ministerial meeting due for today and tomorrow has already been derailed over a diplomatic incident. Now Kashmiri separatists have called a strike against the talks, saying they won't resolve the decade-old Muslim insurrection. It was at the Earth Summit in Rio, after personal contact between the two prime ministers, that the current talks got back on track. They agreed to cool the diplomatic temperature after a row in May involving an Indian diplomat to Islamabad who claimed he'd been kidnapped and beaten up by Pakistani Secret Service agents. That was only a surface blister of the tensions. Kashmir remains at the heart of the bad relations, the two neighbors having fought 2 of their 3 wars over the disputed state. This weekend, India's Prime Minister, making an Independence Day speech, reiterated that Kashmir remains an integral part of India, remarks which have immediately been branded as unhelpful and unfortunate by Islamabad. India has charged that Pakistan is behind the arming and training of insurgents. The Indian Army has clashed with guerrillas it says are filtered across the line which divides Indian-controlled and Pakistani-controlled areas. Large-scale arms hauls have been displayed, India claiming and Pakistan routinely denying that they were supplied by Pakistan. 1,200 have died so far this year in the insurgency. 7 were killed in February when Pakistani troops opened fire on activists trying to breach the line of control. The organizers of that protest were the Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front, the JKLF, whose current strike call has already shut down roads and businesses. They want independence, and their message to the foreign ministers meeting in Delhi today is a plague on both your houses.
A reminder of the main news so far this morning.